Okay, April 26th, 2025. Let's jump right into this because it's pretty big news.
Definitely.
Assam's chief minister, Himanta Biswa Sarma, he basically set social media alight, didn't he? Calling the 1960 Indus Waters Treaty. What was it? One of the greatest strategic blunders in India's history.
Strong words. Very strong.
hmm
Especially coming right after India actually suspended the treaty.
Exactly. It wasn't just some, random comment about history. It ties directly into current events. So what we really need to unpack here is this treaty decades old. Why is it suddenly such a flashpoint?
It's fascinating, isn't it? How something designed really to manage a shared resource, water,
Yeah.
becomes this focal point for modern political tension.
Mm.
To really get Sarma's point, you have to look back at why the treaty was made in the first place.
Right, back in the 50s. Took 9 years, I read. World Bank involved.
9 long years, yeah.
Yeah.
The World Bank brokered it. The whole idea was to divide up the Indus River system waters between India and Pakistan, post-partition, obviously.
And the division itself, how did that shake out?
So you had the Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab. The western rivers, they largely went to Pakistan. Then the eastern rivers, Ravi, Beas, and Sutlej, India, got unrestricted rights over those.
Unrestricted for the eastern ones. But the numbers, the actual volume of water, that's where it gets really significant. Pakistan ended up with something like 80%.
That's the figure often cited, yes.
Ugh.
Around 135 million acre-feet, or MAF, annually for Pakistan. India got the remaining 20%, about 33 MAF.
And just for context, 1 MAF, that's enough water to cover 1 million acres of foot depth.
Yeah.
So 135 versus 33, that's a huge disparity.
It is. And, geographically, India is the upper riparian state. The rivers start here. You'd think that gives you leverage.
Naturally.
But the treaty specifically limited what India could do with those western rivers, the ones allocated to Pakistan. India couldn't build large storage dams, for instance.
Only minor irrigation in these run-of-the-river hydro projects.
Exactly. Projects that use the river's natural flow, minimal storage, whereas Pakistan could build large reservoirs on those same rivers downstream. A key difference.
Okay, so fast forward to now, 2025. Sarma's tweet. His argument is basically that Nehru messed up, caved to pressure.
That's the core of his criticism. He framed it as Nehru yielding to the U.S. and the World Bank, essentially giving away India's water wealth, compromising national interest despite, our geographical advantage.
He hammered that 80% figure again, gifting it, I think he said.
He did. It's a very pointed accusation,
Yeah.
framing it as a betrayal of national interest.
But this criticism, it's not entirely new, is it? I mean, people have argued about this treaty being unfair for years.
Oh, absolutely not new. There's been a long-standing critique, particularly from northern states in India, Punjab, Haryana, Jammu and Kashmir, arguing they needed more of that water for their own irrigation for hydropower.
While Pakistan's agriculture, which is what, over 3/4 of its economy, benefited massively.
That's the narrative, yes. That Pakistan's agricultural sector, hugely reliant on the Indus, got a major boost, while India's potential was curtailed.
You mentioned the U.S. and World Bank pressure earlier. What was the context there, back in the 50s?
Well, Pakistan had initially taken the water-sharing issue to the UN. The World Bank then stepped in to mediate. And you have to remember the Cold War backdrop.
Right, strategic importance.
Exactly. The U.S. was very keen on regional stability, trying to keep both India and Pakistan sort of aligned against Soviet influence. So there was definitely a geopolitical dimension pushing for a deal.
So one view is Sarma's strategic blunder. The other is maybe Nehru saw it as a necessary evil, a diplomatic olive branch, perhaps, to try and build peace.
Precisely. Two very different interpretations of the same event. Was it a giveaway, or was it a calculated move for long-term stability, however flawed it might seem now?
Okay, let's bring it right up to the present. April 23rd, 2025, India suspends the treaty. This was just after the Pahalgam terror attack.
A very direct link was made. Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri stated the suspension holds until Pakistan credibly and irrevocably abjures its support for cross-border terrorism.
Wow. So tying water directly to terrorism, that's a major escalation, diplomatically speaking.
It is. It moves the treaty from the realm of, technical water management into hard national security.
And Sarma's reaction to the suspension, predictably supportive.
Enthusiastically so. He called Modi's decision a historic body blow to the treaty's injustice, framed it as India reclaiming sovereign rights.
And he didn't miss the chance to link it to Pakistan's economy again, did he? The agricultural dependence?
He pointed that out explicitly, saying it strikes at Pakistan's fragile economy. For him, this was Modi correcting Nehru's historic betrayal.
So what does suspension actually mean on the ground? What changes immediately?
Well, the first thing is stopping the flow of data. The treaty mandated sharing river flow data, kind of a transparency measure. That stopped.
Okay. And longer term, does this mean India can now build those dams on the western rivers?
Potentially, yes. The suspension removes those treaty restrictions, at least from India's perspective. It could open the door to revisiting plans for dams, reservoirs, large irrigation projects that were previously prohibited on the Indus, Jhelum, and Chenab.
Which brings us to Pakistan. The impact there could be catastrophic.
The potential is immense. We're talking about water for, as you said, maybe 80% of their farmland, power for about a third of the country, drinking water for, what, 90% of the population?
90%, that's almost everyone.
It's fundamental. So Bilawal Bhutto's Zardari's warnings about the consequences, they carry serious weight. Any major disruption is a huge threat to their stability.
It really does put things in perspective. But, despite all this, the treaty itself has actually survived a lot, hasn't it? Wars, countless crises.
It really has. It's often cited as a rare example of India-Pakistan cooperation actually working, at least on this one issue. The World Bank even called it one of the most durable water-sharing agreements globally.
Quite the paradox, then. Seen as durable, yet also a blunder.
History is complicated, and you have to consider Nehru's position back in 1960. Defending him, you could say it was pragmatic. Well, India's economy then. Building huge infrastructure on those western rivers would have been incredibly expensive, maybe technically challenging too. Plus, the goal was peace building, right? Trying to establish some kind of stable relationship. Hindsight is always 20/20.
And Pakistan's view, they see it as fair, presumably.
They generally argue it was equitable, yes.
Yeah.
Especially being the downstream nation. It gave them water security, allowed them to invest billions in canals and dams based on those guaranteed flows.
So the suspension hitting them now must feel like pulling the rug out, hence the panic you mentioned in Islamabad.
Exactly. It undermines decades of planning and investment based on the treaty's framework. Fears of water scarcity are very real over there.
And this brings us to the human cost. It's easy to talk about MAFs and treaties, but you've got farmers on both sides.
Absolutely. You might have, say, a farmer in Indian Punjab, let's call him Baldev Singh, maybe hoping this finally means more irrigation for his crops.
While across the border, maybe in Sindh, a farmer like
Well,
Asha Bibi is terrified about her fields drying up, about potential hunger.
that's the stark reality. Millions in Pakistan depend directly on the Indus for their livelihood, for basic survival. These aren't abstract geopolitical games for them.
And there's the environment too, right? This basin is already stressed.
Hugely stressed.
Yeah.
Climate change is hitting hard glaciers melting, erratic monsoons. Messing with river flows on a large scale could have really damaging ecological consequences, downstream impacts we might not even fully predict.
Another layer of complexity. It's not just politics and economics.
Not at all. It's deeply intertwined with ecological stability.
And while all this is happening internationally, there's that domestic angle too. The arrests in Assam for social media posts.
Yes. Reports of arrests following the Pahalgam attack, people accused of making pro-Pakistan comments online. A journalist, a lawyer, even an MLA mentioned.
And Sarma threatening to use the National Security Act. It raises questions about, where patriotism ends and clamping down on dissent begins.
It certainly fuels that debate. How national security concerns intersect with freedom of speech, especially in charged moments like this.
So looking ahead, India's suspension, it feels like a strong message, a pressure tactic maybe, but not necessarily ripping up the treaty entirely.
Probably not immediately ripping it up. Unwinding a 64-year-old agreement involving international law, the World Bank, it's incredibly complicated and very risky.
Plus, building new dams takes years, decades even.
Exactly. This isn't an overnight switch. It's likely more about leverage and signaling right now.
So Pakistan's options, where do they go from here?
Likely international forums, the UN, maybe the International Court of Justice. They'll try to challenge the suspension legally based on the treaty itself and international water law.
And within India, it's not like everyone agrees with Sarma, right?
Definitely not monolithic support. You have figures like Sarma applauding the move, but also water management experts, analysts warning about the risks, humanitarian consequences, escalating tensions.
I remember hearing that quote, something like, "Don't fix a leaky faucet by blowing up the house."
That captures the essence of the caution, yes. Is the potential gain worth the potential catastrophic downsides? It's a serious calculation.
And for people listening, maybe far away from the Indus, why does this matter to them?
Because water is universal, food security, energy, cities. They all depend on stable water resources, and conflict between two nuclear-armed nations over a fundamental resource like water that has potential global implications for stability.
It really underscores how interconnected things are. Local resource disputes can ripple outwards.
Absolutely. It's a powerful case study in the challenges of managing shared resources in our complex world.
So as we wrap this deep dive, it leaves us with some big questions. What are the long-term consequences? How does this reshape India-Pakistan relations, which are already, let's say, fraught?
And maybe the biggest question,
Mm.
how do we, globally, figure out better ways to share vital things like water when interests collide so sharply?
A lot to think about. The story of the Indus Waters Treaty, it seems, has just entered a very uncertain new chapter.